Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Fully Charged Show podcast. And I'm very, very pleased and happy to be joined by a young man in Oslo. Now, you may be expecting a Norwegian accent because he's from downtown Oslo, but no, he has been on the show before. He was on the Fully Charged Show podcast last year, about just under a year ago, when he was in Sydney. So please welcome to the podcast, Mr. Ketan Joshi. Hello, Ketan. How are you?
Hey, I'm pretty good. I remember that last meeting we had pretty well. It was super hot day.
A very super hot day on Sydney Harbour, wasn't it? Yeah, with lots of noisy helicopters.
Yes,
I seem to recall.
And right now I'm looking out my window and there's a light dusting of snow. And some really tragic scenes of people shuffling past in huge coats, looking pretty unhappy.
Oh God! Because I was in. That was so annoying when we came to Oslo this year, and I can't remember how it panned out. I couldn't catch up with you then, but it was hot when we were there. I was so surprised, and we were standing outside the railway station, I think, at one point, and it was hot and sunny, and all the Norwegians looked really confused. They didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
I mean, the obvious massive story at the moment, Ketan, is what's happening in your home country, mate.
Yes.
Because it's a little bit warm. The headline that really caught my eye, I mean, obviously we're all supremely aware of what's going on there, but the headline that really caught my eye was that there was a suburb of Sydney, a western suburb of Sydney, that was the hottest place on earth yesterday, which was fairly shocking. It was over 50 degrees, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the shocking thing about that is I looked at the front pages that came out the next morning, and that headline, so that suburb was Penrith, and I think it was like 48.6 degrees Celsius or something around that. The highest on record by a decent long shot for Penrith. But that headline was a couple of centimetres on the front page of the Sydney Morning Herald, and the rest of it was taken up by a very, very severe and very, very significant bushfire crisis that is impacting pretty much every single state in Australia, but specifically it's impacting Queensland, the southeastern states, so Victoria, South Australia, New South Wales and Tasmania, and to a small degree Western Australia and the Northern Territory as well. So it's really impacting the whole country, but very, very specifically in the sort of bottom right-hand corner. So there have been a slew of heat records, and at any other time, that would have been the top story. That would have been all of the front page. Right. But now in Australia, heat records are just that's what you expect to see in summer.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it is such a difficult one because I've been, when I've mentioned something, I retweeted something about the climate impact on Australia and the drought, and I'm aware of that from being a regular visitor to Australia, that the droughts have definitely got worse in the last 30 years, no question of it. And I immediately got a lot of sort of abuse from Australians who are going, it's the Greens that stopped us winter burning in the bush, and that's what caused these fires. Which you go, that is an amazing excuse, because I know for a fact that's not true.
Yeah,
and the reason they weren't doing winter burning was it was too dry, because you'd have had the fires in the winter as opposed to the summer.
Yeah, often with these incidents, what you get is a sort of mythological response where there's an element of truth to it. This is one of those times where there is not an element of truth to it.
Right.
It's just it's a proper, total, actual 100% fabrication, right? So, and the myth goes basically that the environmental / Greens movement in Australia has opposed the removal of fuel loads. So that's when you have a whole bunch of dry bush, dry trees, etc., and you burn that down before fire season starts, so that when fire season does start, the fire doesn't spread as quickly. Exactly.
Yeah.
And so in the sort of minds of people, it kind of makes a weird sense, because they're like, oh, well, these people love trees. And so I can imagine them protesting the burning of trees to reduce fuel loads during a bushfire season. But it's just not true. Like, there's not even really, one random senator 10 years ago who stood up in Parliament and said something stupid. It is just a total lie. They've always supported hazard reduction burns. What the sort of Greens and the environmental movement in Australia have said in the past on this is that you can kind of target those burns differently and control them differently. So they talk about the balance between the smoke pollution that's caused during hazard reduction burns versus the impacts of actual bushfires, because they're basically, when you do those hazard reduction burns, they have their own impact to some degree. Now, of course, so basically the consensus is that on balance, you actually have a net impact, a net improvement in the situation by having a small amount of burning in the off season and then reducing the severity of bushfires. But like any other environmental management topic, people argue about the details. And so that has kind of translated into this meme, and it's been going since 2009. In 2009, there was a very, very severe bushfire crisis in Australia, and one specific day was called Black Saturday. Several hundred people lost their lives. And this meme emerged where people were saying it's actually the Greens' fault because they've opposed hazard reduction burns.
Right.
So it's a long running thing. What the evolution with this particular incident in Australia has been is that it's morphing more into a proper conspiracy theory, right? So it's not just a lie. It's actually a conspiracy theory that climate change activists are lighting fires intentionally to fabricate an ecological crisis, right? So I've been following this very, very closely because it's what happens in Australia is these things kind of start in the fever swamps of the denial Twitter accounts and social media and things like that. But importantly, they tend to sort of like migrate across into mainstream media outlets. What happened a day ago is Channel 7 News, the very big news station in Australia, tweeted a sort of thing saying the police are now working off the basis that much of the impact from the fire crisis has been due to arson. And it's contradicted by the story itself, right? So if you sort of watch the clip, they're like, well, the authorities are saying that it's the ignition point for most of the fires to date have been lightning, but of course it's so soon after we're right in the middle of it still. So that was retweeted by a whole bunch of people who are like, well, you see, it's not climate change, it's arsonists. I just saw this morning it was retweeted by Andrew Neil. BBC/Spectator/Sky News guy. I'm not entirely familiar with his work, but I kind of just read his Wikipedia and I was like, oh yeah, that looks very familiar.
It makes enormous sense that he would buy into that.
So it's a really, you can kind of just see the progression. It sort of gets laundered a bit, like it doesn't retain its sort of crazy elements, of like this is a conspiracy theory from Greenies, but it still progresses and seeps into mainstream media. And the end result is that we already know with absolute confidence that part of the reason that these bushfires are so incredibly intense, they started so early and they've had such an incredible impact on human life in Australia, is because Australia has just gone through its hottest year on record. It's gone through its driest year on record. And those two elements combined, both of which are basically directly caused by climate change, have resulted in fires that burn in such a way that they are basically almost impossible to fight by authorities, right? So the question isn't really so much who is igniting the fires. The question is, why do they spread so fast? And why do they spread in such a way that it is impossible for authorities to combat them? That is the unique element of this season's bushfire crisis.
So in a sense, even if they were started deliberately, the resulting fires are way beyond anything that Australia has experienced before. I mean, that's certainly the impression I'm getting.
Yeah,
they
start for a bunch of reasons that haven't changed. They spread fast because of climate change. That is really, that's kind of summarizing the basic science of it. There are a bunch of other elements on top of that. So there's this thing called the Indian Ocean Dipole, which is basically it's this the way currents move in the ocean that's to the left of Australia. And what it sort of fluctuates between two different modes, right? In one particular mode, it results in a lot more rainfall in Australia, and in another mode, it results in less rainfall in Australia.
Right.
It's in the mode right now that results in less rainfall. So on top of the climate change signal, you've got this sort of inter-year variation that is also resulting in less rain in Australia. That means the landscape is drier, and that means bushfires burn worse. If you basically removed all of those other elements, the bushfires would still be more intense than they have been in the past. So what this becomes is a game of like everyone's throwing variables at each other, right?
Yeah.
So it's like some people are, So you kind of go on Twitter and you say, for a long time, scientists have been saying that climate change is going to change the way bushfires happen in Australia.
Yeah.
And now we are seeing bushfires change the way that they happen. Someone will come back with, well, there's this other causal factor behind it. And it's because, you see this sort of happen with a whole bunch of things. There is no common language for how we talk about causality. We sort of see a bushfire in the news and we're like, okay, someone flicked the on switch on that bushfire. Who flicked the on switch? It was climate change. It was arson. It was a conspiracy theory by Greta Thunberg, who's walking into the bush and lighting fires, right? What the element here really is the intensity and the speed with which they travel.
Yeah.
That is the important part. That's what makes the difference, and that's what makes this crisis so bad. It has always been something that, in particular, politics and media are quite bad at dealing with. Is when you have something that happens, right? A single big dramatic disastrous event, but it happens for a bunch of a multitude of complex, confusing reasons. What we can say with absolute certainty is that it is the fingerprint of the human burning of fossil fuels over the past 4 decades or whatever. Obviously longer, but as in from when we kind of started establishing the science on this. It is the human fingerprint of that behavior that has made this disaster so bad. You would have had a bushfire season regardless. Bushfire seasons happen. It's Australia. So it makes it very hard for public discourse to happen in a neat way on this. Something that has been very interesting is in Australia in particular, is that there has been a really big change between 2009 and 2019/2020 in the way that the media talks about climate change.
Right.
So I was digging back through old articles, right, in 2009 about the Black Saturday bushfires, and journalists and scientists really equivocate. They're like, look, you can't really say that any one event is caused by climate change. But we really strongly have a very sneaking suspicion that it played a pretty decent role in the way that this disaster unfolded in 2009.
Right.
Now there's no equivocation. You look at a scientist talking to a media outlet, and they're just like, this is what we talked about for a long time. If climate change played no role in this would have looked extremely different. And I think part of the reason it's so different now is because what we're starting to see is new things manifest in very new ways, if that makes sense. So you kind of like I mentioned before, Australians are getting a little bit used to heat records being broken and just weirdly hot days. It's starting to become a little bit normal to have abnormal temperatures.
Right.
What we're not used to seeing is mass evacuations. We're not used to seeing skies that look like they're not from planet Earth, right? The photographs from Australia have just been impossible to comprehend. And
the scale of it is so huge.
And I'm sure you experience this too. But the other thing that's been happening is that many direct friends and family have been talking about their own impacts, right? So it's not like a flood in Queensland where the disaster is really sort of
fairly localized, isn't it?
It's severe, but it's localized. With bushfires and the scale of the bushfires, what they have done is they've caused this smoke cloud to occur over many cities. Canberra right now is physically.
I just saw a
shutting
picture
down.
this morning.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's horrendous.
Canberra is shutting down, right? So the Museum of Democracy is closed. Hospitals were closed. I had a friend who was in hospital, and she couldn't get an MRI because the MRI machine is not functional due to the smoke.
Wow.
So what this does is that it actually sort of none of this has happened before. So like this is when people say this is unprecedented. Scientists predicted that the bushfires would get worse. They predicted higher severity. They predicted higher temperatures, and they predicted lower rainfall due to drought. What they didn't predict is a boat like sitting in the ocean in a dark red sky filled with scared people, carrying their pets, carrying tiny babies. That is unprecedented in the very real sense of the word, because it's a human experience that if you I did a tweet about this the other day. If you described what was happening in 2020 in Australia as a prediction in the year 2010, you would have been laughed. You would have been laughed at, right? The conservative media would have just piled onto you as a complete you're an alarmist.
Panic.
Because it's very people have described it as apocalyptic and very sort of sci-fi looking sort of scenes. And I really think that even the scientists who were being a bit bullish about their predictions back in the sort of 2000s, 2010s, didn't see it getting this bad this quickly. Because and I think part of the reason for that is because they themselves were browbeaten into being a bit contained with their predictions, because they knew that if they talked about it and if they said it out loud, they would be on the front page of the Australian the next day with someone being like, this crazy scientist says that there would be the largest mass evacuation in the history of Australia in the year 2020. But it all happened. So that's kind of a quick summary of the
it's pretty
the
intense.
situation.
I think the thing that I wanted to try and, because obviously it's in the news all the time. I mean I just want to remind listeners that the current Prime Minister once went into the House of Parliament holding a lump of coal that had been varnished, so that he could show that it's not dangerous. But it had to be varnished because it's dangerous anyway. But so let's just let that go. That's water under the bridge, except there's no water and there's no bridge. It's burnt down. But I think what I'm intrigued is that every time I'm in Australia, I go, oh my God, this is, I've talked about it with you. If you have solar panels on the roof of your house in England, I think it's worth it. You get some power. Like yesterday, I got 1.2 kilowatt hours that went into my battery. 1.2 kilowatt hours in winter, midwinter. And the other day I got 4.6. So that was a sunny day. So but in the summer I'm getting 35, 40. So that's the difference, So obviously, but in Australia it's insane how much you get. And also, so what I'm intrigued about is whether there's no way of knowing, but whether you think that technology, which has developed so rapidly, from domestic level, people putting solar panels on their roofs, which is amazing amount in Australia. Far more than it was 30 years ago. Real big uptake. Batteries in houses, not electric cars yet, or not very many. But and then the big battery in South Australia, and whether these events will encourage sort of more politicians, not necessarily the federal government at the moment, but more politicians to go, mate, look how well that battery do. Can we get one in Victoria, or whatever? But I don't know.
Well, just to sort of update from our last chat, to do a bit of recent history.
Yes.
So we last talked in February 2019, right? And so a few really key things have happened in Australia between then and now. The first thing that happened was there was a federal election in May, and there was a lot of the Liberal Party, which is the Conservative Party, led by the guy who carried the coal into Parliament. they really sort of put forward like a very, very weak climate policy, but a very strong attack on their opponent's climate policy.
Right.
Now, their opponent's climate policy wasn't that ambitious, right? So this is the Labour Party. They're the opposition party in Australia.
Right.
And they had a 50% renewable energy target by 2030. They had a 45% emissions reductions target by 2030. And they were going to achieve that through this mechanism known as the National Energy Guarantee, or the NEG. I'm not going to go into it. It's the most boring climate policy in the world. It's not bad, but it's so boring. I don't want to talk about it. There's just nothing interesting about it. Basically, it makes emissions a bit lower and it makes reliability also a bit higher. That's it. There's not. But basically, they had this relatively uninspiring policy that they were taking to the election, and they really sort of didn't go wild with the climate change story. So this is the opposition. It was there. They talked a bit about climate change. The sort of the guy running against the current prime minister, his name is Bill Shorten, and he said some things like, we're not climate change deniers, blah blah blah. But he didn't really sort of sell a very strong, ambitious, like very clear message about climate change to Australia. And so one of the consequences of that is that people kind of just went with the status quo in Australia, and they stuck with the existing guy. So Scott Morrison was returned to power. There were a lot of theories flying around about, the Greens opposed this coal mine that's being proposed in the north of Australia, in Queensland. Yep. And that made people angry because the people in the town want the coal mine.
Yeah.
But mathematically, it doesn't make sense as a theory because the numbers are just tiny, right? Like, it's just the people who live around that coal mine, the number of people who would be potentially employed by it. They're not vote swingers, right? Like, it's not really, it wasn't that big an issue. The bigger issue, I think, really was just that the opposition didn't do a particularly good job of selling the climate change story to the Australian people.
Yeah.
Just one quick side note as well on the renewable energy element that's worth mentioning. The Australian energy market operator Run the Grid in Australia, they've just released this really fascinating plan for the future. And they are actually suggesting that it's pretty likely Australia will just reach 50% renewables as a baseline by 2030 without any new policies at all.
Right. It's going to happen anyway.
Yeah. Australia's already about 25. Australia's currently at about 20, 21-ish. This year it'll probably hit about 23, 24%. And then by 2030 it'll just double, because it's just and the reason it's going to double is not because people are going to be really ambitiously building out renewables, but because coal-fired power stations were shut down. They're getting old, and they're shutting down, and then you need to replace them with something. And the cheapest options in Australia are wind and solar, and paired with a small amount of battery storage and a small amount of new transmission lines and expansions of a few small expansions of hydropower stations.
Right.
This is what the grid operator is saying.
Right.
So it gives you an idea of how not ambitious 50% of renewables by 2030 is.
Yeah.
Because that's just business as usual, right? So you can kind of say, well, that's my target. And then, of course, you hit that because you don't need to do anything to get there. But of course, the very heart of climate change action is you need to do more than the business as usual. You need to actually actively work to make some change in the system.
Yes.
And just letting things just naturally happen as they are, it's not enough. Maybe we'll come back to that when we talk about electric cars. So that happened. The election happened. And then after the election, there was kind of, a bit of a break in the middle of the year. And then the climate strike movement had the marches in September. And I did some numbers on this back in September last year because I was very curious. Australia had an abnormally high turnout. It's not abnormal, I mean, it was unusual compared to the rest of the world. So even when you look at London, which has massive population, the relative proportion of the population that turned out to London's climate march was actually smaller than Australia's. And it's a funny story because, Australia has a reputation of being a country of people who don't care about climate change, not just the leadership or the big coal companies, but the people are kind of, they're the type of people who vote in somebody who carries a lump of coal into Parliament.
Yeah.
And it was really, really interesting to see Australia really turn out for that event, right? Because they were just like, you know what? We do want change. We actually don't care that much whether it's Bill Shorten or Scott Morrison or whoever. It's like they don't really see that much of a difference between the two major parties. All they really see a difference is like, are you fixing this problem or are you not fixing this problem?
Yeah.
They would be satisfied if it was fixed by a conservative government, and they would be satisfied if it was fixed by a centre-left government. So that was really interesting because Australia it was a big show of force, right? Like it was really just, I think it was like 300,000, 400,000 people. The other thing that happened is throughout the entire year, I've been following all of the public opinion polling on climate change very closely as well. And what has happened is there has been a very big increase in the percentage of people who are like, please do something about this. It's just it's been so long. We're done with like equivocating. We need some action on this. On top of that, something very, very interesting happened, which was climate change suddenly became the number one issue when you ask people to list their priorities, right?
Wow.
So for basically a decade in Australia, the top of that list has either been something around like, it's been like economics, it's been the economy, it's been,
immigration,
mortgage,
probably.
Immigration and terrorism were the two big ones for the first half of the 2010s. But just something happened right at the end of 2019 where that just like shot up all the polls, and it happened in a bunch of different countries as well. It happened in the UK, with the polling around the general election, and it happened in the US to some degree, mostly with Democratic voters, whereas Republican voters have kind of just stuck in their own little world of like, Trumpian existence. So that was really interesting. And then basically on top of all of that, what has happened is a bunch of news and like advances in renewable energy in Australia. So first of all, battery storage has become a much bigger deal than when you and I last talked.
So even in that last year, it's changed because even then there was the big battery in South Australia, but since then there's been more.
So that big battery is set to get bigger. They're expanding it, and there are 3 or 4 new battery installations that they're not massive. In fact, I think all those other ones together still don't quite match the size of the big one. But what they are is they're really testing boundaries in terms of what those batteries can perform. So they're providing the grid services that is basically being cried out for by Australia's grid right now, which is the short, super fast response kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
So just manage short-term fluctuations. What we're going to need, of course, in the next like 10 or 20 years is a long-term plan. Yeah. We're going to need like new transmission lines, really well thought out build out of new transmission lines. We're going to need some expansion of long-term storage, although not as much as people kind of think that you will. And we'll also need really clever planning for new wind and solar. So they just need to be built in the right places. So you kind of make the most of existing transmission lines. And you also get the best resource so that you minimize the amount of effort that you need to do to integrate variations in wind and solar.
Yeah.
That has suddenly become extremely feasible. So forecasts of a future energy grid that is like 60 to 70 to 80% renewables were almost laughable in like the 2010 like sort of 2010 to 2015. When I say laughable, I mean they were roundly and heavily criticized by critics of renewable energy. But now the grid operator is just being like, this is what's going to happen. So Australia did some projections for what its emissions trajectory is going to do in the next 2 or 3 decades. And even that, those are produced by the government department run by a guy called Angus Taylor. He's the Minister for Environment and Emissions Reductions. And he is no friend of emissions reductions. He's really... he's obfuscated a lot for the past couple of years on this issue. And he's a long-time opponent of wind farms specifically, so going back to last decade.
Right.
But his own department is relying almost entirely on the build-out of new renewable energy, to the extent where he was kind of bragging about how Australia is going to meet the Paris targets, right? Half of that comes from this really tricky cheat from using overperformance on the Kyoto targets. But the reason we overperformed is because those targets were lobbied by Australia to be set painfully weak.
Yes.
So, of course, it's also not really how pollution targets work. Like a company leaching, toxins into a river can't be like, well, we were under our toxin limit last month, so we're just going to do a whole lot more toxins this month. It's not really, it breaks the spirit of the whole thing. But if you look at what's remaining, so most of what they're saying to meet the targets will come from that, but the rest of it is mostly just from renewable energy, right? The shutdown of coal and gas-fired power stations and new renewables. So that's a really massive change in Australia in the sort of way everybody thinks about climate action in Australia, because all of a sudden it's not something you have to plead for anymore. You don't have to stand there going, I promise you that renewable energy is going to do what we say it's going to do. Now it's actually really, it's become the baseline conversation is that coal-fired power stations are going to shut down and they're going to be replaced by wind and solar, whether we like it or not. Wind and solar don't need any new subsidies. That's coming from the lobby group for renewable energy in Australia, right? They're saying subsidies are done, that was a really good system of enhancing
to get stuff moving.
The construction of it. It really catalyzed it all and injected life into it. And so the challenge now is you need guide rails on this transition, right? You need something to sort of make it happen in the most efficient way possible so that the people who use electricity in Australia, they save the most possible money. They pay the lowest possible bills. If you mismanage it, then it'll happen anyway, but it'll be ugly. And so if you think about that situation, the Australian government, going back to bushfires and going back to the Australian government and what's going to happen this year, you can see how it's in their best interest to actually be very bad at managing the transition. Because what they want to say is the whole concept of doing a transition is not good. They want people to worry about what's happening and then say, I want to return to the coal-fired power utopia of 2010. And so they're making a really concerted effort to not do a very good job of managing a transition managing a transition away from fossil fuels, right? So they don't want to help workers in coal-fired power stations and coal mines. They don't want to have clear policy about where to build new wind and solar or where to build new transmission lines. And most of all, they don't want to have any consistency with what they say about climate change. They want to say different things all the time, right? So this morning, Scott Morrison is on doing this massive press conference about the bushfires, which has really raised climate change in the minds of everybody, even beyond what I mentioned, all the increases in 2019. And he's saying, what are you guys talking about? No one in the Australian government is denying climate change. Very similar to something Rupert Murdoch said a couple of weeks ago, where he said, nobody in my organisation is denying climate change, which both of those statements are just mind-boggling, right?
Yeah, because they both did, to an enormous degree for many decades.
I looked onto the page of a Liberal Party MP, and his name is Craig Kelly, and he's posting, like 2010 era climate denier memes, the ones that have like bright pink font and like charts
it's getting colder.
It's like some chart that has been copied like 8,000 times, so it's like 3 pixels big because they don't know how JPEGs work. All that sort of stuff, right? So it's not just that they have climate deniers in their party. They've got the old school classic James Delingpole style, those kind of that class of climate denier. So that he says that today, right? 2 weeks ago, he's saying, I think climate change is real, right? Like, I think this is a real problem and we need to do something, and that's why we're taking action on climate change. But of course, the government's policy is looks like it's action, but it doesn't actually do anything.
Yeah.
Go back in time another 2 weeks, and Scott Morrison is saying people are exaggerating the link between climate change and the bushfires.
Yeah.
Go zoom forward another week in time in like late December. You've got the Deputy Prime Minister saying that climate change is real. Skip backwards in time, you've got him saying that it's cow dung. That cow dung is lighting the bushfires because it's igniting.
Oh my God!
So you get an idea for how the way that the government is responding to this in terms of climate change is by saying as many different things in rapid succession as they possibly can.
Yeah.
I think people probably overused comparisons to Donald Trump. But in this particular case, I think it's sort of relevant because
a similar thing.
Yeah, it's when you just declare, like, if you just have a random word generator inside your own mind and you just press go on it every time you step in front of a microphone, that creates an effect where people don't really know where they stand. And what they're really trying to do with it is create as much confusion and distrust as possible.
Yeah.
So when people, when they release a statement saying we're going to meet our Paris targets, and I go on Twitter and I post a thing saying, well, they're actually not going to meet their Paris targets because of these 10 charts.
Right.
People, the idea is really that somebody looks at both of those things and goes, well, I can't trust anybody anymore.
Yes.
They're both wrong. So this will keep happening over the next 2 months. Of the rest of Australia's bushfire season, because climate change will become bigger and bigger an issue. Now, the absolute key question, of course, is whether it actually works. And I'm actually pretty optimistic that it won't work. I think there has been a real change in Australia's public discourse on climate change, such that they're actually starting to get a little bit. That tactic worked a year ago. It doesn't really work anymore.
Right. Sorry, when you say works, you mean the denial and the obfuscation and the fear, uncertainty, and doubt spread by the government isn't working? Is that what isn't working?
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, there's no real way to know until it all sort of shakes down and finishes in the next few months. But I'm pretty optimistic because what's happening now is a combination of two things. There is pretty widespread discontent with the man himself, right? The Prime Minister.
Yeah.
So you may have seen a few of these clips where he goes into a town and like he's trying to show sympathy with people and
shake hands with someone and they don't want to know.
Well, it's worse than that. They specifically say to him, "I don't want to shake your hand," and he grabs their hand and he kind of just wobbles, just wobbles it in the air, and it's awful to watch. So that is actually, and it's not just, the Twitter bubble or anything like that. No. It's sort of really widespread discontent. I'm sure your listeners know Piers Morgan, and like Australians don't really know him particularly well.
Right.
But to see him, we have an idea of what he's like, the type of stuff he talks about. And even he was, decrying the Prime Minister's response and sort of things like that. And that's really, that's significant because it sort of shows that if he's losing support from even the sort of conservatives around the world. And the other thing is, this has been very widely covered around the world. The world has paid a lot of attention to this crisis, and it has, hasn't it? Yeah. And to the government's response to the crisis as well.
Yeah.
And Australians care how they feel. The Australians care how the world looks at them.
It looks to the rest of the world. I mean, we've had TV commercials advertising. Come and be a tourist in Australia. I think they've pulled them, actually. They had Kylie Minogue and I can't remember who else.
I saw that.
Everywhere looked pristine and beautiful. And then you look at the newspaper or Twitter, anywhere, and there's a red or black sky over beaches that I know really well. Bondi, dark, like middle of the day, it's dark, like winter. It's horrendous.
So Scott Morrison, early in his career, used to be the head of Tourism Australia.
Right.
So he was this marketing guy, right? And he was in charge when Australia did this ad with this model called Lara Bingle. And right at the end of the ad, she says, where the bloody hell are you? And of course it went viral. Or as viral as it can go back then. And to give you an idea of how much has changed since then, the model in that ad, she did a post just basically decrying Scott Morrison, even though he was the one in charge of that ad campaign back then.
Who gave her the gig.
Yeah, wow. and so it's really, it's a really sort of, it's really funny to think of that Tourism Australia ad that's running in the UK now.
Yeah.
And the fact that they've pulled it because of the bushfire crisis.
I guess so. I mean, I haven't seen it again. It may not have.
No, they have pulled it. There was a news article.
Okay.
And so it matters so much that all these things are kind of like linked together. Because Scott Morrison really sits at the center of it all as an individual who, basically sold himself as the guy that could make Australia desirable to the world. And what's happening, of course, is not Scott Morrison's fault, but Scott Morrison is a member of basically a group of people, so not just his political party, but the sort of like media elements and the industrial corporate elements as well, who for the past 3 decades, Australia could have started acting many, many years ago. Even in the late 90s, there was like basically calls for Australia to take strong action. It could have started back then. But what's happened since then is, so you've got Australia's domestic emissions. They've been rising. Australia is one of the highest per capita nations in the world. You've got Australia's exports. So when you look at, when you sort of calculate the world's emissions based on not where the fuel was burnt, but where it was removed from the ground. Australia is about 5% of the world's emissions. Right. You keep in mind it's about 0.1% of the world's population.
But I know, exactly.
And then on top of that, you've also got Australia's efforts to stymie global climate policy. So I mentioned that Australia wants to use those, use credits from a previous climate policy for this current climate policy. It's the only country in the world that wants to do that. It's basically the way climate negotiations work is everybody needs to agree. And Australia just put its foot down at the most recent ones and said, we are not going to let anything happen until you let us use credits from a previous climate policy to count for this one. Wow. And it meant everything just got stuck in the sand and no real outcome was reached at COP25, which was the climate conference in Spain, Madrid.
Yes.
So that all basically, like, Scott Morrison isn't responsible for the bushfires, but the actions that Australia has taken over the past 3 decades has had a material impact on the composition of the Earth's atmosphere. Right. This is a physical real thing that has happened to the planet, and the consequence has been a physical real thing that has happened to Australia, which is on the planet.
Yes.
So it is another one of those things that has several layers of complexity to it. So it means public discussion is kind of tricky. You get people basically being like, so the Premier of New South Wales is Gladys Berejiklian. And there was this really kind of ugly hashtag going around on Twitter, which was hashtag koala killer, basically saying that she was responsible for the death of koalas in bushfires in November. And you can sort of make that argument a little bit about, land management and firefighting practices and funding and things like that. But I think felt it kind of went a bit too far. It kind of
well, it will backfire. That's the problem, isn't it?
I really hate to be both sides are equally wrong guy because in this case it's not that at all. But I think in that particular case, it probably should have just been pared back a little bit because I was it's not. It sort of diminishes the time scale of the problem as well, because it's really something that has been going for a long time in Australia. And it's a real sort of, it's passed down to new generations, it's like this family heirloom of like climate change denial and fossil fuel protectionism, because John Howard did it, Tony Abbott did it, Scott Morrison does it.
It's not a new thing, is it?
And so it's really important to view it as like this dynasty of climate screw-ups over 3 decades. And in that context, it actually all becomes very, very clear in that Australia's actions have impacted the world, and the way that the world has changed has impacted Australia.
Yeah.
That is how it all shakes down for this particular bushfire crisis.
Yeah.
That is really clear in everybody's mind now, I think.
Yeah. No, I'm yes, because we're planning to go there in November this year, or late November, December for Christmas, and I'm really intrigued to see what it's like, because it's it's when you know places, when you've actually been there, and then you see it on the TV and it's burning. If I saw a place in fact, some of the stuff in southeast Victoria, I've never been around there. I don't know that area, but other bits of New South Wales coast, I go, oh my God, we went there. That's I had lunch at the Southern Ocean Hotel on Kangaroo Island last year. Yeah, amazing place. I mean, really posh, gone, completely burnt out. It's extraordinary.
I live in Oslo now, right? So I sort of course, I've watched all of this from a distance, but two things really, really hit us, as in my wife and I. One is the closeness of it all, even though we're not physically close. Yeah. So many of our friends and family, I talk to my parents and they're coughing on the phone. My mom, I talked to my mum yesterday. She can't even speak properly on the phone. Wow. We have many, many friends of ours who have either had to evacuate from the South Coast, or who have lost their childhood home or their actual home.
Right.
It's really, really bad stuff. And the other thing that strikes me is that because I live in Oslo now, I get a bunch of different time zones through my day. So in the morning and late at night I get Australia. In the afternoon I get America and of course other parts of Europe throughout the day as well. And what it means is that I get to see Australia. I get to see what Australia is talking about, and then I get to see what the rest of the world is talking about.
Right, it's talking about Australia.
What has happened in the past 2 weeks? It's all Australia. 5 p.m. people are talking about Australia. It's 7 p.m. 2 a.m. And people are talking about their link to the places that are impacted. Right, so. You talk to an Australian, of course, they will. Every single Australian will have some connection to this disaster, to some degree. My wife and I were married in Kangaroo Valley, which is in along the south coast, close-ish to the south coast in Australia, and that was very nearly impacted by the fires yesterday. On our honeymoon, we went through Burleigh and we visited Mogo Zoo. That entire zoo had to be evacuated. There were red pandas in the kitchen of the guy who runs it. The town, the main town of Mogo, where my wife and I had coffees the day after we got married, that town has disappeared. There's a main street, and almost every single building on that main street is gone. And so this is a disaster that Australians have a really close familiarity with bushfire season, and it's like 1 or 2 days in the summer. Yeah, there's a red sky. Something pretty bad happens to a small town that is just full of great people that don't deserve it. But what we're not used to is everything. Every person, every news story, both in Australia and around the world. Every single photo of the sky. My dad sent me a photo. My dad sent me a video of his dog, chasing a drone around a park. And the first thing we notice is that the sky is brown. Right. The video wasn't of the sky.
It's just there. Yeah.
Suddenly, it is everything. That is something that I think will really. Bushfire season isn't over in Australia. There's still another 2 months to go.
Yeah, I know. It's still the middle of summer, isn't it?
Yeah, but even the phrase bushfire season doesn't mean anything anymore, right? No. Like it's really, it is widening so rapidly that we cannot. The cultural meaning of the phrase has lost its significance because it's different each time. So, I think really, I was a little bit worried that the world wouldn't care that much about this. But
very much so.
In retrospect, there was no way it could have been ignored. It's the scale of it is just massive. So, yeah.
Let's move north. Ketan.
Yes.
I just want to move way north to Norway, because I just love this story about, because I always rave about Norway, and they've got the most electric cars, and they're all really lovely, and there's more equality in Norway than anywhere else on earth, and blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
But one of the reasons they can afford so many electric cars is because they sell an enormous amount of gas and oil.
Yes.
Particularly gas to us. That's where we buy our gas from.
Yeah.
But there's this great story about what's the name of the water? There's a big oil field off the coast of Norwegian.
Johan Sverdrup.
Yes, which is but their wind power, because I've heard about this all the way when we're in Texas later this month. A huge amount of the oil refining and oil pumping in Texas is powered by solar because it's cheaper. So the oil companies have paid for vast solar farms and wind farms to power their refineries, which is so funny. And this is the same thing with Norway. Is clearly not. It doesn't look like, because there's that great series. I think we may have discussed it last time about Norway, about the Russians invading Norway and forcing them to carry on producing oil and gas. And there's season 2 has just come out. I haven't seen it yet, but the Norwegians are clearly not planning on stopping extracting fossil fuels. Look, by the looks of things,
we've been here for 3/4 of a year now, and it's not. We're still learning Norwegian as quickly as we can, and we're still absorbing the cultural elements of the country and things like that. But one thing that has become very clear is the public attitudes towards the extraction of oil, and basically the fact that the country itself depends very much on the continued extraction of fossil fuels.
So you'd say the general public are aware of that. It's not sort of hidden in the background. They're kind of conscious of that being the case.
It's a funny contradiction because it's kind of both. They're aware of it, but it's still hidden in the background.
Right.
And it's because, I think part of it is because a lot of people work in the oil and gas industry in Norway.
Yeah.
It is a significant proportion of the employment in cities like Oslo. But also there is the fact that the money from the sale of fossil fuels powers the country a lot. Like it's it's not just the incomes that people earn when they work there. It's the money that gets put into the sovereign wealth fund, Norway's sovereign wealth fund, and that money is really it's quite a lot of money. So where it gets really interesting, which is basically what you mentioned, is how people deal with the morality of extracting fossil fuels, and the sort of perception of the future when you depend so heavily on it, because really it is linked so closely with Australia. Australia is coal country, Norway is oil country, and Australia is coal country, but the emotions are the same, right? It's this sort of nervousness, because it's like the world is just sort of suddenly realizing that this product that the country was built on in both Australia and Norway is starting to lose its social acceptance around the world. Now what that means is that the companies that do this are like, okay, what do we do? Like, what's next? And the very first thing that a lot of these companies are doing is going, okay, we need to start using renewable energy, but we shouldn't sell less of the stuff we're extracting from the ground.
Yeah.
So what they do is they start to power their operations using renewable energy. Now, this is really important. This is something that people need to be very much aware of, because there's a difference between extracting a barrel of oil from the ground or a chunk of coal and how you power that extraction.
Yeah.
So
that's been my obsession for the last decade, is that whole thing when you see the TV commercial with the notice about the tailpipe emissions. So it's just what happens at the very end of a very big, very heavy global industrial process. Oh, that bit there, that's only 45 grams per, No, it's not. That's about a tenth of it, a huge amount of energy goes into extracting it and refining it.
I loathed the word greenwashing for a long time because I think it was misused. It was used very cynically. But when you sort of take a bit more of a mathematical approach, I'll give you an example. There was a tweet that was sent out by British Petroleum. Beyond Petroleum, they're called
Beyond
now.
Petroleum, thank you.
BP. And what they did was they did this thing saying, put your lifestyle into our little website, and we'll tell you what your carbon footprint is. And then you can do a pledge, like it'll generate, like I pledge to stop driving to the shops, and I pledge to use the Keep Cup and all that sort of stuff, to reduce my daily emissions and turn TVs off at the power switch and all that kind of stuff, right? And for the first time, BP just got absolutely slammed for it on Twitter.
Right.
Like, I'm sure it's happened before, but I don't really remember seeing that happen a lot. And it was because everybody was like, what's your carbon footprint, BP?
Yeah, yeah.
And I was
vast,
curious, and I looked up the answer, and it's the company BP since I think the data went back to about 1987, so it was like 1987 to 2015, or something like that. But basically, BP is about Australia in terms of like their
just
carbon footprint. So the country of Australia, currently 24 million people or whatever it is, and the company BP with like 20,000 staff,
maybe even 100,000, around the world.
Their carbon footprint is the same, right? So per employee of BP is like an order of magnitude higher than per resident of Australia, and Australia is a high country as well. So people are starting to say, okay, we don't care about that you're fueling your fossil fuel extraction cleanly, because it is a fraction of the change that you're making to the world. Because you take these fossil fuels, you pull them out of the ground, people burn them, so you are responsible for the first step in a process where greenhouse gas emission concentrations in the atmosphere increase. So there is a change happening where around the world where countries saying, oh, look, we're using a solar panel to fuel our coal mine, is starting to have less effect than it did before. Now, it's really fascinating to see how it plays out in Norway, because I saw that tweet about their oil field being powered by offshore wind turbines. I went to a couple of energy conferences here where they talk about it, and the justification they use is what we're really doing is using this to pioneer the technology of floating offshore wind turbines, so that down the line we can actually, when the demand for oil dries up, we can transition over to becoming a offshore wind power company or something like that. And of course, between the UK and Norway, there's just so much happening in terms of offshore wind. So they're not lying when they say that, right? They really do mean it. But that isn't quite the relevant question at the moment. The relevant question is, will those companies continue to supply fossil fuels to anybody that asks for fossil fuels? Or will they say, we're actually going to make a supply side change and say, no, it is our actions in supplying this fuel source to the world that is contributing to the problem. And therefore, we're gonna stop existing in our current form as a business, as a fossil fuel extraction business. A bunch of big companies are dealing with this challenge, but a bunch of countries are dealing with it too. So in Australia, the opposition party, the Labor Party, has said, if the world keeps demanding coal from Australia, we will keep supplying it. So, if and they sort of justified on the grounds of the world is going to keep manufacturing, wind turbines and solar panels, and you need coal, you need metallurgical coal to run those plants, to manufacture those things. And out of curiosity, I did a quick calculation, what percentage, if you were to suddenly power the entire world's manufacture of solar and wind using only Australia's metallurgical coal, you would still reduce Australia's coal exports to about 2% of what they currently are.
Wow.
So it's not so you can see how the argument, they're using weak arguments to justify Australia supplying the source of the problem. So the opposition party in Australia are really good at dealing with that's cool, we'll reduce domestic emissions, it's all good, we can do that. But they're not very good at saying, we're going to figure out a way to keep Australia going without relying on this substance that is harming the species.
Yeah.
So this is really going to play out over the next year. It's worth paying close attention to because, Scott Morrison was due to travel to India in a couple of days on a tour in which he was...
To sell coal, yeah. Is he not going anymore then?
He cancelled it.
Wow, that is intriguing.
It's a big deal, right? Scott Morrison is not the type of guy to cancel something because it looks bad. He's a stubborn dude, right? Like he really likes to stick to his guns. So he must have had 100 people in his ear saying, party saying, you cannot go on the selling coal tour of India.
Mate, Scott, listen to me. It does not read well, mate. Listen, you can imagine it, can't you? Yeah.
So the optics of selling coal to the world suddenly matter in Australia.
Yeah.
That's a challenge that the opposition party is going to have to deal with too. Yeah,
it's the same problem, yeah.
Because if, Anthony Albanese, he's the leader of the opposition, if he went on a tour to India to sell coal, which is in line with their policy, he would be basically taken apart for it too as well. So
Right.
So it's really, it's something it's just going to play out over the next year, and I'm sorry I keep coming back to Australia.
It's good.
But Norway's going to have to deal with the same challenge because
I think so. That's why, in a way, that's why I wanted to mention that. Yeah,
the Sovereign Wealth Fund is already divesting a bit from fossil fuels, right? So they're starting with coal. This is investments, right? So it's not a change in the quantity of fossil fuel that state-run organizations in Norway are extracting. It's just they're sort of saying, well, we're going to kind of divest from like the nastiest coal, like American coal companies like Peabody and that sort of stuff. The most obvious place to start. They are tentatively considering divesting from oil and gas, but it's pretty awkward because those companies in Norway, it would be weird if like the money that they put into the Sovereign Wealth Fund isn't invested in what they're doing. Yeah. Because then how do you ethically manage that? Because it's like, we're divesting from oil and gas, but we're also putting a lot of money from oil and gas into the...
But
how do you divest from that?
But the fact that Norway has a sovereign wealth fund, the UK never had one. We had equivalent amounts of oil and gas in the North Sea, which now all run out. The coast of Scotland is now littered with hundreds of dead oil rigs. It's the most extraordinary sight. They're scrapping them all. But we never had a sovereign wealth fund. But the Norwegian sovereign wealth fund is huge.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know it's massive.
It's ludicrous.
It's trillions.
Yeah. Several trillion. Australia has a sovereign wealth fund, but it's about 100 guys, and they just have all that money.
Oh, I see. Yes, they've got it themselves. They've
concentrated among like fossil fuel executives and politicians.
Very sensible. Much more sensible way of doing it.
Yeah.
Ketan, we've gone over the hour, which I try and do because there were some other stories I want to talk about. I think we have to wind it up, and also my cold is not helping. I'm hoping that I will survive the week. The one story I wanted to just very briefly cover because I think it's so funny is again that thing of so in a couple of years ago in America I tried the Impossible Burger, a vegan burger that tasted like a meat burger, but it was nice, it was good, I liked it. Doesn't really it's not meat when you eat it, but it was good. And now the meat industry in America have criticised Impossible Burger and Beyond Meat and other plant-based meat alternatives, saying that they will make men grow moobs because they've got so much estrogen in them, and they're it's just brilliant the way that they've suddenly seen. It's very very similar to the fossil fuel industry. Oh, hang on, there is an alternative that people like that works. Oh my God, no one's going to buy our beef.
Yeah.
It's a bit early, and then a huge amount of scientific research gone into it. No, if you're a man, you won't grow moobs. You're all right. You're more likely to grow moobs if you eat meat, because that's full of hormones. Yeah. So but that's just a silly story. I just wanted to be able to say, am I growing moobs? I'm actually on a medical treatment at the moment that one of the side effects can be, very rarely, can be
moobs.
That you start to develop a little bit of moobage.
moobs.
Yeah, I don't mind. Yeah, it is a very good way. But at my age, it's not such a big challenge. I'll just wear a baggy shirt.
So right, this is very, very interesting because I think that food is something in which consumer sentiment will play a much, much bigger role than something like renewable energy, right?
Or transport, all those things. Absolutely.
So it matters what people feel a lot.
Yeah.
Because they make these decisions every single day. It's not like, you're buying a new car once every 10 years.
Yeah.
It's every single day in the supermarket. So it's really, emotion is very important. Fear is very important. And so exaggerating the risks of not meat, whatever it is, and minimizing the risks of actual meat are very, very important to the companies that are doing this. And it's really, so... it's so ludicrous how consistent the pattern is. Yes. When it comes to some big corporation trying to protect their interests by doing some really ludicrous scare campaign about their competition. Yeah. And so, you and I have talked a bit about this before with electric cars. There was a thing around fires for a while, electric cars spontaneously catching fire.
Batteries are going to explode.
Yeah, and the sort of statistics are twisted in a similar way, right? Where it's like you take something which happens once, you exaggerate that, and you never contextualize it across all the other stuff that happens all the time. Like normal, like combustion car fires.
Combustion that burst into flames all the bloody time.
Yeah, and of course the parallel is perfect here because, of course, meat consumption is pretty bad in some ways for human health. Of course, it's good in other ways, but it's sort of silly to criticize those burgers for being unhealthy. Yeah, because you're not really accounting for the human health impacts of basically making a cow exist for the purposes of getting its meat and then having the associated emissions through its lifetime through...
and the amount, I mean, that's the one thing that Impossible Burger do very well. They show you how much land, water, and feedstuffs is required to make the same size beef burger and what they need. And it's nothing. I mean, it's a tiny fraction to create an Impossible Burger.
We tried a Beyond Burger the other day, actually. Right. We were pretty curious because it was the first time I'd seen it. And maybe I cooked it wrong or something, but my wife took a bite out of it and she's just like, it tastes like pork. It tastes good, but it tastes like pork. I think I overcooked it or something. But I loved it. I thought it was delicious.
Because those... I accidentally bought a Linda McCartney pulled pork burger. And I didn't know that. I thought it was just their normal vegetarian burger, similar packaging. And I cooked it. And then I started eating it and went, oh, God. Because I've been vegetarian only for 2 years. And I went, oh, no, I'm eating meat. That was freakish. That tasted like smoked pulled pork. Yeah. And the texture of it is really weird how clever they are. But, one of the things in that article about the moobs, it's not impossible for a man to be affected by the levels of estrogen in the burgers, but you'd have to eat, and I think it was 25 kilos a day for about a year. If you ate 25 kilos of those burgers a day, you would grow vast moobs, but it's that scale. So if you have one of those burgers 4 times a year, it's not really going to affect you. It was just an absolutely absurd amount that you'd have to eat to make any impact. Yeah. But anyway, that was enough. Well, Ketan, thank you so much. I know you've got a lovely... I heard her making a little noise earlier on. You have a lovely child. How old is she now?
Thank you. She's 1 year and a couple of months. She's doing a whole bunch of amazing stuff at the moment. She's kind of just starting to walk. She's telling us stuff. She's trying to imitate like noises and things like that. She's so like interesting as a person. Like she is
it's amazing. It's amazing, isn't it?
So it's great. It's fantastic.
I've been trying to talk my son into procreating, and he said, you're a really bad example because you were always so bad-tempered when we were kids, which is not true. I want to point out to the listeners. Occasionally I had a bit of a tough day. But yeah, so no, I was trying to tell him how wonderful it is to have a child, and how and that's another topic which we mustn't go into, but is the population, the global population. I mean, you need to have about 5 kids, Ketan, just to make up for all the people who aren't having them.
I know.
The global population is falling off a cliff. Well, like Hungary, I just heard that story the other day. What you get now in Hungary, if you have their population is collapsing.
Oh, really?
There's a very right wing. Yeah, really shocking. Really low birth rate, and you get stunning amount of government support if you have more than 3 children.
Yikes.
So when you have your 4th, if a woman has a 4th child, she never pays income tax. She gets a grant from the government. She gets support for their education. Blah blah blah. You know, because and no one's having 4 children. I mean, it's quite a safe thing to have. No one's having any. And they, of course, they won't. They're extremely right-wing government that doesn't want any immigration because they'll swamp our culture.
Okay. I see.
So it's all based around that. So you've got to bully the women into having hundreds of kids.
Yeah.
But that's a whole other area. We're not
next
talking
time.
about that.
We'll talk about that next time. I have feelings about it.
Yes. Yeah. But anyway, really good to talk to you. Ladies and gentlemen who are listening still, if you are, thank you very much for staying with us. I think it's been fascinating. I love talking to Ketan. He knows some seriously interesting stuff. So thank you very much, Ketan. And please do subscribe to this podcast. Please have a look. If you want to do one of the reviews, we get them every now and then, little 5-star reviews. That's marvellous. We've got over 1 million downloads now, Ketan.
Oh, wow.
People listen. Yeah. I'm really thrilled about that. And have a look at the Patreon link, which is in the show notes. And also all the links to the stories. Actually, we didn't cover all the stories I was going to do, but I'll put the Moobs one, the link to the Moobs story, and the, what was the other story we did do? Well, we did a bit of Norway and a bit of Aussie fires. But, I mean, everywhere, you don't need links to Aussie fires. Just turn on your telly, you'll see them. Yeah. But that's all. So, thank you very much. And as always, if you have been, thank you for listening.